Now, bidding has begun in Baghdad for a stake in Iraq's huge oil reserves. It's the first major sale since the invasion in 2003, and it comes on the same day that US troops pull out from towns and cities across the country. There are the 6 oil fields up for grabs, which between them contain 43 billion barrels of oil. There are also 2 natural gas fields up for sale, but so far only one deal has been agreed. BP, backed by a Chinese company, CNPC, has put in a successful bid for the Rumaila oil plant near Basra. Well, the auction is taking place in a hotel in the heavily fortified green zone, but it's not got off to a good start, with the Iraqi government and the oil companies seemingly unable to agree on prices. The oil companies are also worried about security guarantees and whether future Iraqi governments will honour the contracts. Well, I'm joined now from Dubai by Robin Mills, who's worked in the oil industry for over 10 years and is the author of The Myth of the Oil Crisis. Very good afternoon to you, Mr. Mills. Are you surprised by the fact that only one's been agreed and all the concerns that these people seem to have?
Yes, well, good afternoon, Lorna. No, I'm not really surprised. I mean, I think those are the concerns that everybody was expecting them to have, obviously security and whether the contracts would be honoured. Whether they'd be subject to review later on, and also, of course, the question of the fees and the profits that the foreign companies are going to make out of these fields. That's a very controversial issue, particularly within Iraq itself. Yeah,
I mean, you have extensive knowledge of the industry and of what happens, particularly in places like this. How much is it possible to put a figure on how much these fields are worth and how profitable they could be in the future?
Well, these fields, in terms of profits to Iraq, of course, are enormously profitable. I mean, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, potentially up into the trillions. When you're talking about what the foreign companies that are bidding are going to make out of them, they're going to make a fair return on their investment, I would say, not more. They're big fields, big profits, but not big profits relative to the amount of investment that has to go in.
The ins and outs of the deals I know we don't know, but I mean, is there history in places like Iran in that area of the Gulf where oil deals have been done and they have been reneged on by future governments or different authorities?
Well, actually, in the Middle East, the governments here have generally tended to stick to the deals pretty well, even in Iran. Although I think Iraq might turn out to be a bit of a special case. Obviously, over the last few years, there's been a lot of concern about deals done in Russia and Venezuela and other such countries about how secure they turned out to be. But I must say the Middle East countries generally have been good at honouring their agreements.
I know in your book you explore a theme that is going to war for oil. I mean, there were lots of accusations, weren't there, at the time when the American and British forces went into Iraq, that this was all about the oil. What's your reflection on that now that we've come to this stage where the oil fields are being sold off?
Well, I mean, I think firstly we should say that these fields are not. I mean, thinking of it as being sold off, that's not the right thing at all. Companies are coming in to develop them. They're doing a job. They're getting paid for doing the job. These BP and other companies are not going to own the oil. They're not going to have any rights to the oil. They're just going to have the rights to get paid for doing some work. And I think if you look back at the invasion, yes, of course, there's still a lot of controversy about why the invasion happened and whether it was the right thing. But I think if it was a war for oil, it was a very misconceived one. I mean, if you talk about the US spending some $2 trillion on the invasion so that a bunch of foreign companies could make $1 or $2 billion, I mean, the numbers just don't really add up. So I think that theory, doesn't make sense.
I don't know if I'm interested to know, I mean, are they mostly Western companies that are bidding for these contracts, or are there other companies more local to Iraq?
Not really local companies, no, but there are certainly a lot of non-Western companies. I mean, you have the British and Americans, but you also have the Chinese, of course, like BP's partners. You have Indian companies, Koreans, Malaysians, Russians. So, you really have a kind of who's who of the international oil business bidding for these fields.
And as we've been mentioning, the Americans start their pullout now. Because the troops aren't there does not necessarily mean there will be stability. How high a factor is that in a consideration for the big oil companies when they put in a bid and they look at running these oil fields?
Well, I think it's a huge factor. I mean, the international companies are going to have to put people on the ground in Iraq if they want to do the job properly. But they're very concerned about the safety of their people and the safety of the installations. and they're going to have to look at that very carefully. Of course, these fields are in the south of Iraq, which generally has been seen as safer than some other parts of the country. But still, that will be a big issue, and I'm sure they'll be taking a lot of security advice.
Robin Mills, we very much appreciate your expertise. Thanks for joining us today.